At midnight, a lonely rancher found a child shivering near the fence. The next morning, everything changed. The wind howled across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory like a banshee's cry, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the promise of another harsh winter. Samuel Sam McCready pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his weathered frame as he stepped onto the porch of his modest ranch house. At 43, Sam had grown accustomed to solitude, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of ranch life that had sustained him through 15 years of self-imposed isolation. The moon hung full and bright in the star-scattered sky, casting long shadows across his property. Sam had always been a light sleeper, but tonight something different had stirred him from his restless dreams. A sound, faint but persistent, drifted across the prairie wind. At first he dismissed it as the cry of a coyote or the creak of old fence posts, but as he listened more carefully his blood ran cold. It was crying. Human crying. Sam's calloused hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip. In these parts, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news, especially at this ungodly hour. He'd learned that lesson the hard way years ago, when his world had been torn apart by strangers in the night. But this wasn't the sound of approaching riders or the whispered threats of cattle rustlers. This was something far more vulnerable and desperate. Following the sound across his property, Sam's boots crunched through the frost-covered grass as he made his way toward the eastern fence line. The crying grew louder with each step, punctuated by small, frightened whimpers that tugged at something deep within his chest. A part of him he'd thought had died along with his wife, Margaret, 5 years ago. Near the old wooden fence that marked the boundary of his land, Sam stopped dead in his tracks. Huddled against a fence post, barely visible in the pale moonlight, was a small figure wrapped in what appeared to be a tattered blanket. As he approached cautiously, the figure looked up, revealing the tear-streaked face of a young girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old. "Sweet Jesus," Sam whispered, immediately holstering his weapon and dropping to one knee beside the child. The girl was in a pitiful state. Her dark hair was matted and tangled, her clothes were little more than rags, and her bare feet were cut and bleeding from what must have been a long, desperate journey across the rough terrain. But it was her eyes that struck Sam most profoundly, large, dark, and filled with a terror that no child should ever have to experience. "Hey there, little one," Sam said softly, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The girl didn't respond, only pulled the blanket tighter around herself and shrank back against the fence post. Sam noticed dark bruises on her arms and what looked like finger marks around her thin wrists. His jaw clenched with a familiar rage, the same fury he'd felt when he'd been powerless to protect those he loved before. "It's all right," he continued, slowly extending his hand. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Sam. What's yours?" Still no response, but the girl's eyes followed his movements carefully, like a wild animal deciding whether to trust or flee. Sam noticed she was clutching something tightly in her small fist, something that caught the moonlight with a metallic glint. "You must be freezing out here," Sam said, shrugging off his coat and holding it out to her. "Why don't you come inside where it's warm? I've got hot coffee and some leftover stew that might fill that empty belly of yours." For a moment, the girl seemed to consider his offer. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched the edge of his coat. Her fingers were ice-cold and trembling. Sam's heart ached as he gently wrapped the coat around her small shoulders, noting how it practically swallowed her entire frame. "There we go," he murmured. That's better, isn't it? As he helped her to her feet, Sam caught a glimpse of what she'd been clutching so tightly. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Dangling from a delicate silver chain was a heart-shaped locket, a locket identical to the one his late wife Margaret had worn every day of their marriage, the same locket that had been buried with her 5 years ago. Sam's mind raced with questions and impossible possibilities, but he pushed them aside. Right now, this child needed care, not his confusion. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was, and began the walk back to his house. "Don't you worry, little one," he said as they crossed the moonlit yard. "Whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, you're safe now. I give you my word on that." The girl rested her head against his shoulder, and Sam felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond his own survival. As they reached the porch, he glanced back at the fence line where he'd found her, wondering what forces had conspired to bring this mysterious child to his doorstep. Inside the warm glow of his modest home, Sam settled the girl in his favorite armchair near the fireplace and stoked the dying embers back to life. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the sparse furnishings and the few remaining photographs of his life with Margaret. The girl's eyes were drawn to these images, particularly one of Margaret wearing her distinctive locket. "Are you hungry?" Sam asked, moving toward the kitchen. "I've got some beef stew that's still good." The girl nodded slightly, the first real response she'd given him. As Sam heated the stew, he found himself stealing glances at her, trying to make sense of the impossible coincidence of the locket. In the firelight, he could see that despite her bedraggled appearance, she was a beautiful child with delicate features and intelligent eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. When he returned with a bowl of warm stew and a cup of milk, the girl accepted them gratefully, eating with the desperate hunger of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Sam sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to process the evening's events. "Can you tell me your name?" He tried again, his voice soft and patient. The girl looked up from her bowl, studied his face for a long moment, then whispered in a voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Emma." "Emma?" Sam repeated, and something about the name felt familiar, though he couldn't place why. "That's a pretty name. Emma, can you tell me where you came from? Where are your parents?" At the mention of parents, Emma's face crumpled, and fresh tears began to flow. She shook her head violently and clutched the locket tighter, as if it were her only anchor in a world gone mad. "It's all right," Sam said quickly, moving to kneel beside her chair. "You don't have to talk about it right now. You're safe here, Emma. I promise you that." As the night wore on, Sam found himself watching over the sleeping child, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion in the warmth of his home. He'd fashioned a makeshift bed for her on the sofa, covering her with his warmest blankets. In sleep, the fear left her face, and she looked like any normal child should, peaceful and innocent. But Sam couldn't shake the mystery of the locket or the feeling that Emma's arrival was more than mere coincidence. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, he made himself a promise. He would protect this child, no matter what secrets she carried or what dangers might follow in her wake. Little did Sam know that with the rising sun would come visitors to his isolated ranch. Visitors who would force him to confront not only Emma's mysterious past, but his own carefully buried secrets. The lonely rancher's quiet life was about to become anything but quiet, and the choices he made in the coming hours would determine not only Emma's fate, but his own redemption. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through his windows, Sam heard the distant sound of approaching horses. His peaceful morning was about to be shattered, and everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change forever. The sound of hoofbeats on the hard-packed earth outside his ranch house sent a chill down Sam's spine. He'd been expecting this, had known that a child doesn't simply appear in the middle of nowhere without someone coming to look for her. But that didn't make the reality any less unsettling. Sam moved quickly to the window, careful not to wake Emma, who was still sleeping peacefully on his sofa. Through the morning haze, he could make out 3 riders approaching at a steady pace. Even from a distance, something about their bearing suggested they weren't here for a social call. The lead rider was a tall, thin man in a black suit and bowler hat, clearly not a rancher or cowboy. Behind him rode 2 larger men, their hands resting casually but deliberately on their sidearms. Sam's instincts, honed by years of frontier life and painful experience, told him these men meant trouble. "Emma," he whispered, gently shaking the child awake. "Emma, honey, I need you to wake up." The girl's eyes fluttered open, immediately alert despite having just awakened. It was another sign that she'd learned to be constantly vigilant, a skill no child should need to master. "There are some men coming," Sam explained quietly. "I want you to go upstairs to my bedroom and hide in the wardrobe. Don't come out until I call for you. Understand?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched the locket tightly as Sam helped her to her feet. "Take this with you," he said, handing her a small bell from his mantelpiece. "If you hear me ring this bell 3 times, you run out the back door and hide in the barn until it's safe. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Sam watched her disappear up the stairs, then checked his Colt .45 and positioned himself near the front door. The riders were close now, and he could hear their voices carrying on the morning air. A sharp knock echoed through the house, followed by a voice that was cultured but carried an undertone of menace. "Mr. McCready, we'd like a word with you, if you don't mind." Sam opened the door slowly, keeping his hand near his weapon. The man in the black suit stood on his porch, flanked by his 2 companions. Up close, Sam could see that the leader was probably in his 50s, with pale skin, cold gray eyes, and the soft hands of someone who'd never done an honest day's work in his life. "Gentlemen," Sam said evenly, "little early for visiting, isn't it?" "My apologies for the hour," the man replied with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "My name is Cornelius Blackwood. I represent certain interests in the territory. We're looking for a missing child, a young girl who may have wandered onto your property." Sam's expression remained neutral, though his mind was racing. "Can't say I've seen any children around here. This isn't exactly the kind of place kids tend to wander." Blackwood's smile widened, but it was predatory rather than friendly. Of course. But you understand, Mr. McCready, that we have reason to believe she might have come this way. The child is valuable to my employers. They're quite anxious to have her returned safely." "Valuable how?" Sam asked, his tone sharpening. "Let's just say she's important to certain family matters," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Inheritance. Issues, you understand, legal guardianship and such. Very boring, really, but quite lucrative for those involved." One of Blackwood's companions, a burly man with a scar running down his left cheek, shifted impatiently. "Boss, maybe we should just search the place. Save everyone some time." Sam's hand moved closer to his gun. "I don't think so. This is my property. and you're not welcome to search anything without proper authority." "Authority?" Blackwood chuckled. "Mr. McCready, I think you misunderstand the situation. The child we're looking for is extremely important to some very powerful people. People who don't take kindly to interference in their affairs. And I don't take kindly to threats on my own land," Sam replied coldly. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sam could see the two gunmen tensing, ready for violence. But before anyone could make a move, the sound of another approaching rider broke the standoff. A lone horseman crested the hill, riding hard toward the ranch. As he drew closer, Sam recognized him as Deputy Marshal Tom Bradley, a decent man he'd known for several years. Tom's arrival seemed to catch Blackwood off guard, and the man in the black suit's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "Morning, Sam," Tom called out as he dismounted. "Saw the horses from the ridge and thought I'd check in. Everything all right here?" "Just fine, Tom," Sam replied, relief evident in his voice. "These gentlemen were just asking about a missing child." Tom's eyes narrowed as he studied the three visitors. "Missing child? Haven't heard anything about that through official channels? You boys file a report with the sheriff's office?" Blackwood's jaw tightened. "This is a private family matter, Marshal. No need for official involvement. Funny thing about missing children," Tom said, his hand resting on his badge. "They tend to become official matters real quick, especially when there are men with guns riding around the territory looking for them." The scarred gunman took a step forward. "Maybe you should mind your own business, lawman." Tom's expression hardened. "Son, missing children are exactly my business, and threatening a federal marshal is a federal crime. You sure you want to go down that road?" Blackwood quickly intervened. "Please, gentlemen, there's no need for hostility. We're simply concerned citizens looking for a lost child. If she's not here, then we'll continue our search elsewhere." "That sounds like a fine idea," Sam said firmly. "And I'd appreciate it if you didn't come back without proper legal authority." Blackwood's cold eyes fixed on Sam's face. "Of course, Mr. McCready, but I should mention, the people I represent have very long memories. They don't forget when someone interferes with their interests." "Neither do I," Sam replied, his voice steady despite the implied threat. The three men mounted their horses, but before they rode away, Blackwood called out one final warning. "We'll be in touch, Mr. McCready. You can count on that." As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Tom turned to Sam with a concerned expression. "Sam, what the hell was that about? And don't tell me you don't know anything about a missing child." Sam was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Tom Bradley was a good man, but involving the law could put Emma in even more danger. On the other hand, he clearly needed allies if he was going to protect her from whatever forces were pursuing her. "Tom," he said finally, "if I tell you something, can I trust you to keep it between us until we figure out what's really going on?" "Depends on what it is, Sam. But you know I've always been straight with you." Sam made his decision. "Come inside. There's someone I want you to meet." He led Tom into the house and called softly up the stairs. "Emma, it's all right, honey. You can come down now." After a few moments, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, still clutching her locket. She descended slowly, her eyes fixed on the stranger in the star-spangled badge. Tom's expression softened immediately. "Well, I'll be damned. Hello there, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered, moving to stand close to Sam. "Emma, this is Deputy Marshal Tom Bradley," Sam explained. "He's one of the good guys." Tom knelt down to Emma's level. Emma, can you tell me where you came from? Are those men who were just here the ones you're running from? Emma nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. They, they hurt people. They hurt my mama. Sam and Tom exchanged a grim look. This was clearly more serious than a simple custody dispute. Emma, Tom said gently, do you know why those men want you? The little girl looked down at the locket in her hands, then back up at the two men. Because of what Mama told me before she went to heaven. She said I had to find the man in the picture. What picture? Sam asked, though something deep in his gut already knew the answer. With trembling fingers, Emma opened the locket. Inside was a small photograph. A photograph of Sam and Margaret on their wedding day taken 15 years ago. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Sam's old mantel clock. Tom stared at the locket, then at Sam, then back at Emma. Sam, Tom said slowly, I think we need to have a much longer conversation. As the implications of Emma's revelation began to sink in, Sam realized that his quiet life as a lonely rancher was truly over. The past he'd tried so hard to bury was rising from the grave, and with it came questions that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and the night that had changed everything 5 years ago. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Sam couldn't shake the feeling that the weather was the least of the storms heading his way. The silence in Sam's modest living room stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap under the weight of revelation. Tom Bradley sat heavily in the wooden chair across from Sam, his weathered face etched with confusion and concern. Emma remained close to Sam's side, the opened locket still trembling in her small hands, the wedding photograph of Sam and Margaret clearly visible in the flickering firelight. Sam, Tom said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, that's your wedding picture. How in the hell does this child have Margaret's locket? Sam's mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. He'd buried Margaret himself 5 years ago, had watched as they lowered her coffin into the cold Wyoming ground. The locket had been around her neck. He'd made sure of that, wanting her to carry their love into whatever came after. I don't know, Sam admitted, his voice hoarse. Margaret was wearing that locket when we laid her to rest. I watched them close the coffin myself. Emma looked up at Sam with those impossibly old eyes. Mama said the lady in the picture was my other mama. She said when the bad men came, I should find the man and give him this. Your other mama. Tom leaned forward. Emma, sweetheart, what was your mama's name? Sarah, Emma whispered. Sarah Whitmore. But the bad men called her something else. They called her Sarah McCready. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face draining of color. Tom was on his feet instantly, steadying his friend. That's impossible, Sam breathed. Margaret never had any sisters. She was an orphan, raised by the church in Denver. She told me she had no family. Sam, Tom said carefully, sit down. We need to think this through. But Sam was already moving, pacing the small room like a caged animal. No, this doesn't make sense. Margaret would have told me if she had a sister. We shared everything. He stopped abruptly, a memory surfacing like a bubble rising from the depths of a dark pond. Margaret, in the weeks before her death, had been receiving letters. Letters she'd been secretive about, claiming they were from old friends in Denver. But now, with the clarity of hindsight, Sam remembered how nervous those letters had made her, how she'd burned them immediately after reading. The letters, he murmured. What letters? Tom asked. Before Margaret died, she was getting letters. She said they were from friends, but she was different after reading them. Scared, maybe. And she started talking about wanting to visit Denver. Said she had some business to take care of. Emma tugged on Sam's sleeve. Mama Sarah said her sister was sick. Said the bad men made her sick because she wouldn't tell them where Mama was hiding. The room seemed to spin around Sam. If what Emma was saying was true, then Margaret hadn't died of the fever as the doctor had claimed. She'd been murdered, poisoned, perhaps, because she'd refused to reveal her sister's location. "Who are these bad men, Emma?" Tom asked gently. "Do you know their names?" Emma nodded solemnly. "The man in the black suit, he works for Mr. Ashford. Mama said Mr. Ashford was a very bad man who hurt people for money." Tom's face went pale. "Ashford? As in Jeremiah Ashford? You know him?" Sam asked. "Know of him," Tom replied grimly. "He's a businessman from back east, owns mines, railroads, land development companies. But there are rumors, dark rumors about how he conducts his business. People who cross him have a tendency to disappear." Sam knelt down in front of Emma, taking her small hands in his. "Emma, honey, why does Mr. Ashford want you? What makes you so important to him?" Emma's lower lip trembled. "Mama said it's because of what my daddy left me. She said Mr. Ashford thinks it belongs to him, but it doesn't. Daddy gave it to me before he went to heaven." "What did your daddy leave you?" Sam asked. Emma reached into the pocket of her tattered dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and worn from handling. She handed it to Sam with the solemnity of a child passing on a sacred trust. Sam unfolded the paper carefully, Tom reading over his shoulder. It was a deed, a legal document transferring ownership of a substantial tract of land in the Colorado Territory to one Emma Sarah Whitmore. The land was described as containing mineral rights and all associated claims, and it was signed by a man named James Whitmore. "Sweet Jesus," Tom breathed. "Sam, do you know what this is?" Sam studied the document more carefully. The land described was in an area where several major silver strikes had been made in recent years. If the deed was legitimate, Emma was the rightful owner of what could be an incredibly valuable mining claim. "This is why they want her," Sam said, understanding flooding through him. "It's not about the child, it's about the land." "But why kill Margaret?" Tom asked. "If they wanted information about Sarah and Emma, why not just take Margaret?" Emma's small voice provided the answer. "Mama said her sister was very brave. She said when the bad men came to ask about us, her sister told them she didn't know anything, but they didn't believe her. So they made her drink the bad water to make her tell the truth." "Poison," Sam said, his voice flat with rage. "They poisoned my wife." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that filled Sam with a cold fury, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Margaret had been protecting her sister and niece, had died rather than reveal their location to Ashford's men. And now those same men had found Emma anyway. "There's more," Emma said quietly. "Mama said if anything happened to her, I should tell the man in the picture about the other papers, the ones hidden in the special place." "What other papers?" Tom asked. "Mama said they prove Mr. Ashford is a bad man. She said they show how he hurt lots of people to take their land. She said if the right people saw them, Mr. Ashford would go to jail forever." Sam and Tom exchanged a look. If Sarah Whitmore had somehow obtained evidence of Ashford's criminal activities, it would explain why he was so desperate to find Emma. The child wasn't just an obstacle to his land grab. She was a potential witness to his crimes. "Emma," Sam said gently, Do you know where your mama hid these papers? Emma nodded. In the old church, the one where Mama used to pray. She said it was safe there because God protects his house. Which church, sweetheart? Tom asked. The one with the broken bell. Mama said it was where her sister got married. Sam's heart nearly stopped. There was only one church that matched that description. The old mission church outside of Clearwater, about 20 miles north. It was where he and Margaret had been married 15 years ago, and its bell had been cracked by lightning just a few months after their wedding. I know the place, Sam said. But if we're going to retrieve those papers, we need to move fast. Blackwood and his men won't give up easily. Tom stood up, his hand moving to his gun belt. Sam, this is bigger than just protecting Emma now. If she's right about those papers, we could be looking at bringing down one of the most powerful men in the territory. But it's also going to be dangerous as hell. I don't care about the danger, Sam said firmly. They killed my wife. They're trying to steal from this child, and they're not going to get away with it. Emma looked up at Sam with trust and hope shining in her dark eyes. Will you help me get Mama's papers? Will you make the bad men go away? Sam knelt down and gently cupped Emma's face in his hands. I promise you, little one. We're going to get those papers, and we're going to make sure the bad men can never hurt anyone else again. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses once again echoed across the prairie. But this time, there were more of them. Many more. Tom moved to the window and cursed under his breath. Sam, we've got company. Looks like Blackwood brought reinforcements. Sam could see at least a dozen riders approaching the ranch, and they weren't coming for a friendly chat. Blackwood had clearly decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. Emma, Sam said urgently, remember what I told you about the bell? If things go bad, you run to the barn and hide. Don't come out until Tom or I come to get you. But what about the papers? Emma asked, fear creeping back into her voice. We'll get them, Sam promised. But first we need to deal with these men. As the riders drew closer, Sam checked his weapons and prepared for what might be the fight of his life. He'd lost Margaret to these men's greed and violence, but he'd be damned if he'd let them take Emma too. The lonely rancher's quiet life was about to become a battleground, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But for the first time in 5 years, Sam McCready had something worth fighting for, and someone who needed him to be the man he'd once been. The war for Emma's future was about to begin. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder as Blackwood's expanded force approached the ranch. Sam could see through the window that the man had brought at least 15 riders this time, enough firepower to overwhelm any resistance. But as the riders drew closer, Sam noticed something that made his blood run cold. Some of them were wearing badges. Tom, Sam said urgently, some of those men are lawmen. Tom peered through the window and cursed. Corrupt deputies. Ashford's got half the territorial government in his pocket. He turned to Sam with grim determination. We can't fight them all, but we can't let them take Emma either. There's another way out, Sam said, thinking quickly. The root cellar has a tunnel that leads to the barn. Margaret and I dug it during the Indian troubles a few years back. We can get Emma out that way. But before they could move, Blackwood's voice boomed across the yard. McCready, we know the child is in there. Send her out and nobody gets hurt. Sam looked down at Emma, who was pressed against his side, trembling but trying to be brave. Emma, honey, I need you to listen very carefully. Tom and I are going to create a distraction. When we do, you go down to the root cellar. It's the door in the kitchen floor. Follow the tunnel to the barn, then ride my horse Thunder to the old church. Can you ride? Emma nodded. Mama taught me. Good girl. Wait for us at the church. If we don't come by sunset, you ride to the nearest town and find a real lawman, not one of Ashford's men." Tom was already positioning himself at the side window. "Sam, we need to buy her time to get away." Sam kissed Emma's forehead. "Go now, sweetheart, and remember, you're braver than you know." Emma disappeared into the kitchen just as Blackwood shouted again, "You have 1 minute, Macready, then we're coming in." Sam and Tom took positions at opposite windows. Sam called out, "Blackwood, you want to talk? Come up here alone." "I don't think so, Macready. You've had your chance to be reasonable." The attack came swift and brutal. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions as Blackwood's men surrounded the house. Sam and Tom returned fire, but they were vastly outnumbered. Windows shattered, wood splintered, and the air filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of violence. "Sam!" Tom shouted over the gunfire. "We can't hold them much longer." "Just a little more time," Sam replied, praying that Emma had made it to the tunnel. But their resistance was short-lived. A smoke grenade crashed through the front window, and within moments the house was filled with choking gray clouds. Through the haze, Sam heard boots on the porch and knew their time was up. "Drop your weapons!" Blackwood's voice commanded as armed men poured through the doors. Outnumbered and outgunned, Sam and Tom had no choice but to surrender. As the smoke cleared, Blackwood stood in the center of Sam's living room, his cold eyes scanning the space. "Where is she?" Blackwood demanded. "Gone," Sam said with satisfaction. "You're too late." Blackwood's face darkened with rage. "Search the house. Search every inch." While his men tore through Sam's home, Blackwood approached the two prisoners. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Macready. That child is worth more than your pathetic little ranch could ever be." "She's worth more than your boss's entire empire," Sam shot back. "She's innocent, something you wouldn't understand." "Innocent?" Blackwood laughed coldly. "That child is the key to the largest silver deposit in the Colorado Territory. Her father discovered it before he died, and now Ashford needs that deed to make his claim legal." "So you killed Margaret to find her," Sam said, his voice deadly quiet. "Your wife was stubborn," Blackwood replied with a shrug. "She chose to protect her sister instead of being reasonable, just like you're doing now." One of Blackwood's men returned from searching the house. "She's not here, boss, but we found a tunnel in the cellar, leads to the barn." "Then she can't have gotten far," Blackwood said. "Mount up, we'll track her down." But as they prepared to leave, one of the corrupt deputies approached Blackwood with a concerned expression. "Sir, we've got a problem. There's a federal marshal riding hard this way, and he's got a full posse with him." Through the broken window, Sam could see a cloud of dust on the horizon. Someone was coming, and they were coming fast. Blackwood's confident demeanor cracked slightly. "How did they know?" Tom smiled grimly. "Because I sent a telegraph to the territorial marshal before I rode out here this morning. Told him I might need backup." "You son of a—" Blackwood raised his hand to strike Tom, but the sound of approaching riders made him reconsider. "Boss," one of his men called out, "we need to go, now!" Blackwood's eyes burned with fury, but he knew he was trapped. "This isn't over, Macready. Ashford has resources you can't imagine. He'll find the girl, and when he does, you'll wish you'd never interfered." As Blackwood and his men mounted up and rode away, Sam felt a mixture of relief and dread. Emma was safe for now, but the danger was far from over. The federal posse arrived 20 minutes later, led by a stern-faced man who introduced himself as Marshal William Hayes. After Tom explained the situation, Hayes immediately organized a manhunt for Blackwood and his men. "We'll get them, Hayes assured Sam. But first, we need to find that child and get those papers she mentioned. If they're as incriminating as you think, they could be the key to bringing down Ashford's entire operation. Sam and Tom rode hard toward the old mission church, their hearts heavy with worry for Emma. As they crested the hill overlooking the valley where the church stood, Sam's heart nearly stopped. The old building was surrounded by riders, but not Blackwood's men. These were different riders, and as they drew closer, Sam could see they were protecting the church, not attacking it. "Who are they?" Tom asked. Sam squinted in the afternoon sun, then broke into a smile. "Neighbors. Word must have spread about what's happening. Those are ranchers from the surrounding area." Indeed, as they approached, Sam recognized faces he'd known for years, men who'd respected his desire for solitude, but had never forgotten that he was one of their own. When trouble came calling, the frontier community had rallied to protect one of their members. "Sam!" called out Jake Morrison, a grizzled rancher from the next valley over. "The little girl's inside. She told us everything. We've been waiting for you." Inside the old church, Sam found Emma kneeling before the altar, her small hands pressed together in prayer. When she saw him, she ran into his arms, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I found them," she whispered. "I found Mama's papers." Hidden behind a loose stone in the altar, Sarah Whitmore had concealed a leather satchel containing dozens of documents, contracts, correspondence, and financial records that painted a clear picture of Jeremiah Ashford's criminal empire. The papers detailed murders, land theft, bribery, and corruption on a massive scale. "This is enough to hang him," Marshal Hayes said after reviewing the documents, "and half the territorial government with him." But Emma had one more. Surprise. From the same hiding place, she produced another item, a letter addressed to Sam McCready, written in Margaret's familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, Sam opened the letter and read, "My dearest Sam, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my sister Sarah has found the courage to send Emma to you. I pray that you can forgive me for the secrets I kept, but I was trying to protect you both. Sarah is my twin sister. We were separated as children when our parents died, and I thought she was lost forever. When she found me 3 years ago, she was in terrible danger from the man who had murdered her husband for his mining claim. I helped her hide, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they found us both. Emma is not just my niece, Sam. She is the daughter I always dreamed we would have. In my heart, she is our child, and I pray that you will love her as I do. The papers Sarah has hidden will prove Ashford's crimes, but more importantly, they will ensure Emma's future. The mining claim is worth more than we could ever imagine, enough to give her the life she deserves. I know this is a lot to ask, but please, my darling, be the father to Emma that you would have been to our own children. Love her, protect her, and help her grow into the remarkable woman I know she will become. All my love, always and forever. Margaret P.S. The locket was my mother's. I gave it to Sarah when we were children, and she gave it to Emma. It was always meant to bring our family together. Sam's vision blurred with tears as he finished reading. He looked down at Emma, who was watching him with hopeful eyes, and saw not just a child in need of protection, but the daughter he and Margaret had always wanted. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling down to her level, "how would you feel about coming to live with me? For real, I mean. As my daughter." Emma's face lit up with a joy that could have powered the entire territory. "You mean it? You want to be my papa?" "More than anything in the world," Sam said, pulling her into his arms. 6 months later, the trials were over. Jeremiah Ashford and his associates had been convicted on multiple counts of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The corrupt officials in his network had been removed from office, and the territorial government was slowly being cleaned up. Emma's mining claim had indeed proven to be incredibly valuable, but Sam had established a trust to ensure the money would be used for her education and future, not to change their simple way of life. The ranch had been rebuilt and expanded, with a proper room for Emma and space for the small school Sam had established for the children of neighboring ranchers. Emma had blossomed under his care, her natural intelligence and resilience shining through as she learned to trust and love again. On a warm spring evening, as Sam and Emma sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Emma looked up at him with the same trust and love he'd seen in Margaret's eyes all those years ago. "Papa," she said, using the name that still made his heart swell with pride. "Do you think Mama Margaret would be happy about us being a family?" Sam smiled, his hand gently stroking her dark hair. "I think she planned it this way, sweetheart. I think she knew that we needed each other." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "And when I grow up, I'm going to use my money to help other children who don't have families, just like Mama Margaret would have wanted." "That sounds like a perfect plan," Sam agreed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sam reflected on how much his life had changed since that midnight when he'd found a shivering child by his fence. He'd thought his story was over, that he was destined to live out his days as a lonely rancher haunted by the past. Instead, he'd discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Emma hadn't just brought purpose back to his life. She'd brought love, laughter, and hope for the future. The lonely rancher was lonely no more. He was a father, a protector, and a man who had learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to love you, no matter what. And as Emma fell asleep against his shoulder under the vast Wyoming sky, Sam knew that Margaret was watching over them both, smiling at the family she had helped create even in death. The story that had begun with tears and terror had ended with love and redemption. And for Sam McCready and his daughter Emma, it was just the beginning of their new life together. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.